Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Crypt13, and in today's video, we are going to be breaking down Gorou's kit in full. He is the general of the Watatsumi forces, but now since the Vision Hunt decree is technically over, I guess he's out of a job now, huh? So I guess he's gonna take up adventuring with the Traveler. But anyway, he is a bow-wielding Geo Vision holder, and if you've watched my previous Ito and Albedo videos, you'll have an idea of just how much extra firepower Gorou brings to these characters, of course by the power of math. So we're going to be doing an in-depth explanation on how Gorou's kit works exactly, so strap in and let's get into it. First off is Gorou's role. Gorou is the very definition of a niche support character. He really is designed to support defense scaling characters, and as of right now, those characters are Noelle, Albedo, and Ito. If you don't have or don't plan on using any of these characters, then you might want to reconsider pulling for Gorou, unless of course you are pulling purely for aesthetics. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that as well, so pull for, of course, whoever you want. Now let's talk about Gorou's stats. Gorou's stats are a little bit on the low side. He neither has a very good base attack stat, and his base defense stat is actually kind of low among 4 stars, even though a lot of his kit is based around defense. Once, of course, passives are unlocked. For example, Barbara has more defense than Gorou at 669. Bennett is a pretty thick boy with 771 defense, and Kaya has an insane defense of 792. Of course, Xinyan and Noelle have the highest defense out of the 4 stars at 799. Gorou's base attack is only 183 and his base defense is only 648. His Ascension stat is extra geo damage bonus though. Moving on to his normal and charge attacks. Now there's really nothing to talk about here because it's a pretty normal and charge attacks for a bow character. There's really nothing special here. He's got an aim shot and a fully charged aim shot that is exactly the same as almost every other bow character in the game. For example, at talent level 8, the fully charged aim shot has a scaling of 198.4% damage scaling. So again, nothing special. It does geo damage once fully charged. Now we talk about Gorou's elemental skill. This is where things get interesting. So first off, upon casting, it's going to deal AoE geo damage and sets up the General's War Banner. This skill actually scales off of his attack stat, but he does have a passive skill that will boost the damage based on his defense, but we'll talk about that when we move on to the passive skills section. This skill is going to create 2 geo particles for him, which is not too much considering it's a 10-second cooldown skill, but it is what it is. Once the General's War Banner is placed, it is going to provide buffs only for the active member on the field, based on the number of Geo party members on the team. And yes, Gorou does count as one party member. So with one Geo character, you're going to get a flat defense bonus that scales off of the talent level and not Gorou's own defense. So for example, at talent level 6, you're going to get 289 extra defense, at level 7, 309, at level 8, 330. So Gorou's own defense makes no difference to the amount of defense that he provides for his team. With 2 Geo characters, you're going to get an increased resistance to interruption. Pretty simple. Not much else to say there. And with 3 characters, you're going to get a geo damage bonus of 15%. This is always going to be 15%, and it does not scale with more talent levels. And like I just mentioned before, this has a 10-second duration and a 10-second cooldown, so that means uptime with his elemental skill is going to be no problem at all. It's always going to be up. Gorou can also only deploy 1 War Banner at any one time, so this means a sacrificial bow will not create a second. Now, co-op might have some different rules if you have multiple Gorous, however, but even then, the buffs will not stack if there are 2 banners on the field. This buff also lasts an extra 2 seconds if the character leaves the AoE of the banner. This is a pretty nice quality of life, so you can still retain buffs if the enemies leave the AoE of your banner. It's also very important for Gorou himself, but we'll talk about that when we get into his burst. But that's a great segue, so let's go ahead and talk about his elemental burst now. It has the exact same properties as his E-skill, first and foremost, needing a certain amount of Geo characters to get certain buffs. The buffs are exactly the same, and the conditions are also exactly the same. The additional property that you get from this is that every 1.5 seconds, it is going to generate a crystal collapse that deals AoE Geo damage to one enemy within the AoE. Also, every 1.5 seconds, it is going to pull crystallized shards to your active character. Additionally, unlike the static nature of your E-skill, his elemental burst is going to follow your active character, meaning you don't have to worry too much about positioning with Gorou's elemental burst. There are a couple weird properties with this elemental burst, so you do have to know that your E skill will get destroyed if you use your elemental burst. Likewise, if you place your E skill down while your burst is up, it won't get created. This makes a lot of sense because your E skill and your elemental burst provides the exact same buffs, so only one of them can be active at any one time. But what this does mean in terms of gameplay is that you should not use your E skill when your burst is active. Try to have a little bit of patience if your E skill is off cooldown when your burst is active, because it's kind of just a waste. You're going to put your E skill on cooldown and you're not going to get any extra benefit, besides maybe the 2 geoparticles that it creates, but it's better to just hold on to it, in my opinion. The damage of this skill actually scales off of Gorou's defense. So at level 8, the scaling of this is 157.15% of your defense. At level 8, the Crystal Collapse is 98% of your defense. So it's not anything too crazy compared to Albedo. Albedo's scaling is about double this. And also Albedo's defense is much higher. So don't expect too much damage from this elemental burst. This skill is going to last 9 seconds and has a 20-second cooldown with an 80 cost burst, so it's pretty expensive and it doesn't last very long. And so since this skill scales off of Gorou's defense, and the fact that this skill gives you buffs to your defense, this is supposed to increase the damage of your crystallized collapse damage and your skill damage while it's up. However, since Gorou doesn't snapshot his skills, this means that once you switch him out, the damage of your crystal collapse is actually going to go down. However, the effects of Gorou's buffs lingers for 2 seconds after you leave the AoE, which is the same as switching Gorou out. So he will retain his defense buffs himself for a little bit after he switches out, but afterwards your crystal collapse damage is going to get weaker. The only buff that he's going to retain is one of his passive buffs that increases his defense by 25% for 12 seconds. And so that makes a great segue into his passive skills. So his first passive skill is that after using his elemental burst, he is going to increase the defense of party members by 25% for 12 seconds. So the term party member also includes Gorou himself, so don't worry about that. And this is the only buff that he is going to retain during the entire duration of his elemental burst after switching him out. So that extra flat defense that you get from having one Geo character will not apply to the Crystal Collapse 2 seconds after Gorou switches out, which is really unfortunate, but that's the nature of his skill, not snapshotting. If you don't know what snapshotting is, all it means is that it takes your stats at the moment of casting to calculate the damage. And since Gorou doesn't snapshot, his damage lowers once that buff goes away. Gorou's next passive is that he's going to receive a damage bonus to his attacks based on his defense. His E skill is going to get a damage increase of 156% of his defense, and his elemental burst is going to get a 15.6% increase based on his defense. Now, this is a flat damage increase that is very similar to Ito's passive skill on his charge attacks and Zhongli's passive skills that are based on his HP. Those are just examples, and any other flat damage bonuses that behave this way work exactly like this passive skill. The 15.6% for his elemental burst is kind of low, but you do get a couple of crystal collapse procs, so each of those gets a 15.6% damage bonus based on his defense. So it definitely starts to stack up a little bit. A typical Gorou at around level 80 is going to have around 1400 to 2100 defense, so your E skill activation is going to get a 2000-ish damage increase, and your crystal collapses will get about 280 extra damage per proc. So it's a decent damage increase, but it's nothing too crazy. Now in this video, we're actually going to go over Gorou Constellations as well. So let's go ahead and move on to that, starting with C1. When characters other than Gorou within the AoE of Gorou's abilities, either his E skill or his elemental burst, deal geo damage, the cooldown of Gorou's E skill will decrease by 2 seconds. The effect can occur only once every 10 seconds, so what this means is that per E skill cast, you're going to reduce your skill cooldown from 10 to 8. It can't go any lower due to that 10-second restriction. This also means you have to run a second Geo character to make any use out of his C1. Gorou's C2. When your elemental burst is in effect, the duration is extended by 1 second whenever your active character obtains an elemental shard from a crystallized reaction. The effect can occur once every 0.1 seconds up to a maximum extension of 3 seconds. What this means is that we increase our elemental burst duration from 9 to 12 seconds seconds with a 20-second cooldown, and the 0.1 second cooldown for each shard just means that if you happen to grab a shard at the exact same time, you won't get a 2-second extension, for example. So try to space them out just a tad. This is pretty much just to prevent an instant increase of 3 seconds from gaining 3 shards at the exact same time. Gorou's C3 just increases his E skill by 3 levels. Gorou's C4 is that when his elemental burst is either at level 2 or level 3, this means that you are getting the resistance to interruption buff or the geo damage buff, then Gorou will also actively heal characters within the AoE of his elemental burst by 50% of his own defense every 1.5 seconds. So basically, every time a crystal collapse occurs, you will also heal the active character. In order to utilize this constellation, this does mean you have to use at least 2 geo characters on your team. Gorou's defense is also not super high, so on most average builds, you'll get your defense up to 2500 max. So if we do 50% of that, you're only healing about 1250 HP every 1.5 seconds. So it's definitely nowhere near the level of a dedicated healer or even Bennett. This also means you should not use the Ocean Hued Clam set for Gorou because he's just not going to be healing enough. It also only heals your active character and not the entire party, so you're really not going to be healing too much to make any use for the Ocean Hued Clam set. So just don't use it. Now if you build Gorou in a very classic way, for example running Defense Sands, Geo Damage Goblet, and a Crit Circlet, you're going to get less heals, whereas if you built defense on every single artifact set, you'll get more heals, but a little bit less damage. Of course, depending on your subsets. Now let's talk about Gorou's C6, because after using either your E skill or your elemental burst for 12 seconds, you are going to increase the crit damage of all of the party members' geo damage based on the buff level that Gorou is providing. So with one character, that means just solo Gorou, 10% extra crit damage, 2 geo characters, 20% extra crit damage, 3 characters, 40% extra crit damage. Do note that this only increases the crit damage on your geo attacks only. So those were Gorou's constellations. Let's now talk about his weapons. Now being a bow character, there are no bows that give you extra defense. So what we want to focus on is as much energy recharge so we can have as much uptime on our elemental burst as possible. This means Favonius Bow and Sacrificial Bow are our 2 best choices. Favonius Bow is going to be a little bit better because it gives you more energy recharge. Sacrificial Bow has higher attack, but Gorou's kit kind of scales more off of his defense. Also, the reset doesn't really work for Gorou because you can only have 1 up at any one time anyway. So in my opinion, the higher energy recharge from the Favonius Bow is going to be better here. Now, I'm going to say that the Stringless is a usable weapon on Gorou, although probably not preferred. The damage bonus is going to increase his E-skill damage and his ultimate damage, so those crystal collapses will deal a bit more damage, and the elemental mastery is not entirely useless. I'm not saying that it's good, but I'm also not saying that it's bad. I'm just saying it's not entirely useless. Elemental Mastery is going to increase the effectiveness of those crystallized shields. So if you're not running a dedicated shielder, then your crystallized shields will be a little bit thicker. Elegy for the End 5-star weapon is a very good support weapon that increases the attack of your party by 40% and Elemental Mastery by 200. And again, Elemental Mastery here, it's not good, but it's not bad, it's just not useless. This weapon also has a nice energy recharge main stat to help Gorou with burst uptime. Attack percent is also not entirely terrible for Ito if you're gonna use Gorou with him. Ito's attack is low, but it's not super low like Hu Tao. He's on the level of most 4 stars, and 4 stars make great use of attack percentage. But those are really the only weapons that I could think of that are decent on Gorou. But if you guys have any other weapon recommendations, then go ahead and drop a comment down below. Now let's talk about artifact sets for Gorou. First off is the new 4-piece hood set, the Husk of Opulent Dreams, and this works very well to increase his damage because maintaining 4 stacks on this artifact set is very easy, especially when Gorou is off field. Keeping 4 stacks means he'll get the full benefit for his crystal collapse damage. So this is definitely his best set for damage. 2-piece Emblem of Severed Fate and the 2-piece hood will give you less damage than the 4-piece hood set, obviously, but this is used if you don't want to farm a proper 4-piece set for him and instead just give him an extra boost to energy recharge to help with burst uptime. Now, if you do use 3 geo characters, you shouldn't need too much energy recharge. Also, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to matchups and how well you place your geo constructs to provide you with geoparticles. Next up is a 4-piece Noblesse Oblige set. This is a purely support set to increase the damage on your Noelle or Ito. Noelle's base attack is a bit low, and Ito's, again like I said before, is on the level of a 4-star, but an increase in damage is an increase in damage. 20% extra attack at level 80 for both of these characters is about an extra 150 attack, of course depending on the weapon, but you know, this gives you a pretty rough idea on how much you get from the Noblesse set. Next is a 2-piece hood set with the 2-piece Noblesse set, and this is going to increase your elemental burst damage as its main focus. It's not as good as the 4-piece hood set, but again, a set if you get tired of farming a 4-piece set for him. Now let me go ahead and contextualize some of Gorou's damage. So here I did some math for his damage, and in these graphs I am going to be looking at his E-skill damage, his burst skill damage, and his crystal collapse damage, where we deal 6 crystal collapses, because if you are dealing a crystal collapse every 1.5 seconds for a 9-second duration, then you will proc crystal collapse 6 times. So the first graph and table that we're looking at is when we are changing the main stat artifacts for Gorou. When we switch between defense, geo damage bonus, and crit rate, all of them being defense, and then defense, and crit rate. Here we're going to be using a Favonia's Bow, the 4-piece hood set. We're going to be looking at crit damage only, and then average damage in just a bit. And then when we have Geo Resonance with 2 Geo Partners. So if we take a look at the damage, yes, the classic way to build your characters, defense, geo damage, and crit rate, it gives us the highest amount of damage in terms of our E-skill, but just our E-skill. It's not that much higher when we run 3 defense sets, and then when we take a look at the burst skill damage and the crystal collapse, it's actually lower. So for our E-skill damage, there's only a 2% difference, and then when it comes to our burst damage and the crystal collapse, there's about 11.5% difference between a classic built character and a triple defense built Gorou. This makes a lot of sense because one of Gorou's passive skills gives you a flat damage bonus depending on your defense stat. So that flat damage bonus is making your burst skill damage and your crystal collapse a lot stronger. Now when we run defense crit rate, it's going to be the lowest in terms of crit damage, but the advantage here is because we're running crit rate. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at average damage now. So when we take a look at average damage, you'll see that defense, geo damage, and crit rate is at the top, even when it comes to burst skill damage and crystal collapse damage. And then running defense crit rate is going to slightly surpass running triple defense. This is because triple defense has abysmally low crit rate. The damage difference here is about 10% when it comes to the classic build, and then the triple defense on our burst damage, and then about 23% on our E-skill cast damage. And then when comparing triple defense and then double defense crit rate, we have about a 10% difference when it comes to our E-skill and 4% when it comes to the crystal collapse and the elemental burst. So honestly, this is not too big of a damage difference. So if you just can't manage to get a good set with defense, geo damage, and crit rate, then running double defense or even triple defense is honestly not terrible. So don't beat yourself over if you just can't get yourself a good artifact set. Here's a visualization, and you can see that triple defense is the lowest, and then double defense is the second best, and then your classic build is going to be the best, and the gap is not super huge between all of them. Now let's go ahead and take a look at artifact comparisons with the 4-piece Husk, 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate, 4-piece Noblesse, 2-piece Emblem of Severed Fate with 2-piece Hood, and 2-piece Noblesse with 2-piece Hood. First off, the 4-piece Hood set is definitely the de facto winner here. It definitely does the most damage in terms of elemental burst damage and E-skill damage. When compared to the next set, the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate, there's a 25% damage difference. So this second bar here, the yellow, is 25% damage difference. The red, this is about 14% damage difference. The blue, also about 14% damage difference. So the elemental burst here, since the Emblem of Severed Fate increases our elemental burst damage, that gap is a little bit smaller. When we move to the 4-piece Noblesse Oblige set, even with a 20% damage increase in our elemental burst damage, when we move to the 4-piece Noblesse Oblige set, even with a 20% increase in our elemental burst damage, we still see a 25% damage difference on all of our attacks. The positive of running the 4-piece Noblesse set here, of course, is that extra 20% attack bonus you give to either your Ito or your Noelle. And of course, even though they scale off of defense, attack percent is not bad because an increase in damage is still an increase in damage. So the question you really want to ask is that 20% increase in attack better than the damage output that the 4-piece hood set can provide, or the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate can provide? When we move on to the 2-piece set combinations, starting with the Emblem of Severed Fate and the hood set, this one does slightly more damage than the 4-piece Noblesse set, but only slightly. Our elemental burst damage increases by just a little bit. When we run 2-piece Noblesse and 2-piece hood set, our elemental burst damage increases by a little bit more. When compared to the 4-piece hood set, there's only about a 12% damage difference between our elemental burst damage. And with our E-skill, it's about 18. Now, I kind of want to answer the question, is the 4-piece Noblesse Obliged set the best on Gorou, or is the 4-piece hood set the best on Gorou? Obviously, the 4-piece hood set is giving us the most damage, but does that 20% attack surpass the extra damage that the 4-piece hood set is dealing over the 4-piece Noblesse set? So first off, let's just take a look at our elemental burst damage. So when we take a look at this graph here, this is just our elemental burst damage, and the 4-piece hood set deals about 5,000 more damage, 5,600 to be a little bit more exact. So this means, does the 20% attack buff allow Ito and Noelle to deal 5,000 more damage in 12 seconds than this 4,000 damage on these artifact sets? And I think the answer is very easy to decide. 4,000 damage is not a lot. So this means the Noblesse set is going to give you more overall damage, because Ito and Noelle are definitely going to be dealing more than 4,000 damage with the attack buff that they get for 12 seconds. So that would be my suggestion. A 4-piece Noblesse set is actually a pretty good set on Gorou. But of course, you know, don't pull your hair out because you don't have this set. All of these other sets are still pretty decent. Now we're going to talk about Gorou's team. And like I said at the very beginning of this video, Gorou's place on teams is pretty much to support Noelle, Ito, and Albedo. So you should definitely use these characters if you want to use Gorou. However, it doesn't mean you have to use all 3 of them at the same time, nor does it mean you have to run a triple geocomp to maximize Gorou's abilities. Because remember, it takes 3 characters to get that final 15% extra geo damage bonus. And here's where I want to talk about triple geo, because maybe it is a trap, because for example, this is just one example, running double geo with Bennett is just going to be straight up stronger. 1000 attack from a Bennett buff is way better than a 15% geo damage bonus. That's just no contest at all. But of course, what you're going to sacrifice here is a consistent and reliable shield from Zhongli, for example, if you were to run Gorou with Ito or Gorou with Noelle. Or you would sacrifice off-field damage from Albedo. These are just things that you should think about, and don't overestimate the 15% damage bonus that you get from running 3 characters, and you definitely shouldn't feel like you need to run a triple geo comp. Alright, leave a comment down below if you're going for Gorou, and on anything else that I might have missed. I'm also on Twitch and Discord, guys, so make sure to check the description down below for those links. Anyway, this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Thank you so much. And if this video helped you out at all, don't forget to hit that like button and maybe even consider subscribing to my channel. Until next time, I will see you guys later.